Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm a Ukrainian Canadian. Today's May 20th, 2023. Now let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? So, unfortunately, the Russians have completely captured the city of Bakhmut, and the Ukrainians have been holding the city for over 10 months, so there is nothing to be ashamed of. And I think that Bakhmut has served a strategic goal, and that was to be essentially a black hole for Russian resources and also for Russian forces. It has eliminated, and the Ukrainian forces have eliminated, massive amounts of Wagner's forces and Russian forces in the city alone. And I think that was the correct decision to continue defending the city because of how important and symbolic this fight was for the Russians, right? They promised to the Russian population that they would capture it. That was back in the summer, then the fall, then the winter, and now we're in the spring of 2023, and officially they have captured the city. But there's nothing to be also disappointing in because it's a true Pyrrhic victory for Russia. They have overspent and they no longer have the budget anymore to push further. This is the limit of their offensive at this point, and I really can't foresee them to be able to push past Bakhmut unless they really pull all the resources and just do a massive frontal attack here, which would be suicidal. As you can see, the other thing why it's not really disappointing is because the Ukrainians have had a lot of time and have had some great local counteroffensives, successful local counteroffensives in the north and the south, essentially liberating and regaining a lot of the territory that was lost in the last few months, and also allowing the Ukrainians to pull out of Bakhmut safely. I think that was also one of the reasons why they started this counteroffensive. And I really do think that the large Ukrainian counteroffensive that everybody's been talking about has started, as I mentioned a few videos ago, when we started hearing reports about this counteroffensive around Bakhmut, mainly due to the fact that it's spreading anxiousness and it's making the Russians, they kind of are a little bit panicked because, well, it's happening on one front, and now because they've over committed to capturing Bakhmut, they don't want to lose it. So now, with the news that came out that they're also taking more reinforcements and other several battalions to reinforce their positions around Bakhmut, meaning that they're going to have a lot of holes in other places. As you can see, they might have used some of the forces that were stationed in Kremina to push them into Bakhmut, and same around Avdiivka, right? Meaning that they're going to have a lot more holes throughout the front line, which is already massive for the Russians. And I think that their confidence is being shattered right now because they see that they just don't have the capacity to defend the entire front line. So this is one of many auxiliary offensives that I think Ukraine's going to start, and they've already started. Obviously the Bakhmut one, it's very local, it's nothing huge, but I think that as the weeks go by, we're going to start seeing a lot more of these local offensives, maybe in Kremina, who knows, maybe around Svatove, right, when we were discussing that a few months ago around end of 2022, where Ukraine was very active here. They could reopen that front again, or even north of Luhansk by the Russian border, right, where we can see that there's far less Russian defenses set up here. So I think that, the options are limitless. And one thing is that war is super dynamic. As we've seen, nobody could have predicted the fantastic and brilliant Kharkiv counteroffensive, right? But that was a window of opportunity that was opened for the Ukrainian forces as they were trying to crack the Russian defenses in Kherson, and they took it and deliberated a massive amount of territory in Kharkiv and parts of Luhansk as well. Nobody could have foreseen that, and I think the same thing is going to happen here. We're not going to be able to foresee exactly where Ukraine's going to crack, Russian defenses. Of course, we're all talking about Zaporizhzhia, and I think that that's going to happen. There's different discussions as to where exactly. Could it be from Orikhiv to Tokmak and then Melitopol, or could it be through Polohe, going to Berdyansk? There's different variations here that we can discuss, but at the end of the day, I think it's just a matter of opportunity, seeing as things dynamically change, where the Russian positions move. And I think, as I've mentioned, because the Russians are now moving some of their forces to reinforce Bakhmut, it means that there's now new opportunities opening up somewhere else. And obviously, we don't know exactly where the Russians are pulling out its forces to reinforce Bakhmut. But again, as time goes by, I think Russia won't have the choice but to continue doing these types of things, which will open a lot of opportunities for Ukraine. So I'm definitely optimistic in terms of that. So overall, this is not a huge loss for Ukraine. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is also the fact that yeah, it's good that Russia captured the city, but they just won't feel safe operating within the city. Look, they don't have a buffer zone of about 20 to 30 kilometers to feel safe, right? Safe from the artillery range, the Ukrainian artillery, which is very close by, right? Chasiv Yar, I have no doubts that there's Ukrainian positions here, and they have fire control over the city. The city's been pulverized as well, so you can't really like set up safely any command posts because most of the buildings have been destroyed and are not safe, right? Structurally speaking. So the Russians are not going to be safe here. Even if they claim that they've captured the city, Ukraine still holds some high ground around Klishivka in the south, and they're pushing towards Berkhivka as well. Slowly, but it's happening. So the Russians are not going to be safe here. So overall, I think it's good news in the sense that this was a massive Pyrrhic victory, and Bakhmut was truly a black hole for the Russian army. There's no doubt about it. Now, I wanted to go over the next slide, and this is very important. So it seems like the United States is going to approve sending the F-16s to the Ukrainian Air Force, but there are preconditions, which is, to me, very frustrating, right? It seems like for the last few months, ever since the war, it's always been about these preconditions. And on this one is the fact that they will only send these F-16s if Ukraine agrees to not use them to attack Russia, right? Targets within Russia. And to me, that is super disappointing and frustrating, right? How many times does Ukraine need to, how many times do NATO allies and the United States need to set conditions on the sale or giving weapons to Ukraine, right? This war would have been over much quicker if that wasn't the case, right? Because the West knows what they need to give to Ukraine for them to win, right? They just want to slowly bleed out Russia. And that is frustrating because this is at the expense of Ukrainian lives. And Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons for security guarantees in the 90s. One of the ultimate sacrifices that Ukraine did, right? For ensuring global stability, right? Under the Clinton administration. And now Russia can be shelled or bombed, but Ukrainians can be, and that's totally fine. So Ukrainians can die, but everybody else around the world, well, they can't. And to me, for Ukraine, what is really important is I've mentioned it before, that they need to be able to hit Russian military targets within Russia, bring the war to Russia. It's super important, right? Nobody said in World War II, we can't hit Germany, we can't cross the red lines, we're going to anger Hitler. Yes, I do understand that there's the nuclear aspect of it with Russia and that they've been wiggling this nuclear bravado to us for, ever since the war started, right? Don't do this. But if you do this, then we're going to use the nuclear weapons. How many times has Russia talked about this, right? We need to call their bluff because that only incites other countries that have nuclear weapons to go ahead and do the same thing Russia's doing, right? All you need to do is just wiggle this little nuclear threat and everybody steps back and is like, oh, whoa, we shouldn't be crossing the red lines. We're very serious about it. Russia's used that argument for thousands of times, right? The amount of times that you've seen the state TV channels, Solovyov or even Medvedev, the old Russian president, Russian puppet of Putin's puppet essentially, but everybody's been in Russia has been using this argument that we're going to use nuclear weapons, and I understand what it implicates, but we need to call their bluff because if we don't do that, otherwise Russia's going to get their way. Anyways, I digress, but I am fully for being able to hit Russian military targets. I repeat, not civilian targets, because Ukraine should not be allowing itself to become Russia, right? Russia is inhumane. It has no morality, and that's what's been striking civilian targets in Ukraine, whether it be hospitals, maternity wards, whatever, you name it. You've seen it all. Ukraine cannot allow themselves to become like that, and we haven't, right? Or the Ukrainian people have not allowed themselves to become like that. They've been always humane and always give a way out for prisoners of war and treated the soldiers and even the Russian people in a humane way, which is not the case for the Russian people. But for Ukraine to be able to accelerate the process of victory, they need to be able to hit Russia's air bases, military bases, strategic, infrastructure such as oil refineries, the electrical grid that powers their bases, things like that, right? Bringing the war back to Russia because, right now the people in Russia are not really activated because they don't feel this war really. Yeah, sometimes there's a drone here and there that is flying, there's an explosion, but it's really the Russians still feel very safe and they don't feel like there's a war, right? That's why they're pretending that they're winning and look, the war's not happening in Russia, so we're all happy. But in my opinion, Ukraine needs to have the green light to hit Russian military targets. There's no doubt about it, and not hit civilian targets. I'm fully against that. We need to be humane and have morality on our side. That's the only way that you can win the hearts and minds as well of the Russian people, or some of their mind, of some of the people in Russia at least. And the other thing that is very positive. Although I had a very big rant against all these conditions that were given to Ukraine, is that the Pentagon was very surprised at how quickly the Ukrainian pilots were able to be formed through these flight simulators. They were anticipating it to take about a year and a half, so 18 months, but the Ukrainian pilots were able to really operate it efficiently in a matter of 4 months. Right, and I remember a couple months ago I mentioned that some of the pilots went to the United States to get training, and that's super great news, right? Of course, it's not going to be a quick process for Ukraine, and it's going to take some good amount of time before they get these F-16s and be able to operate them. But this should have been done such a long time ago, and not with these conditions. No more of these conditions. Allow Ukraine to strike Russian military targets in Russia. It's going to end the war much quicker and make our world much better as well. Now, this is a really fantastic article by The Atlantic, and I recommend you to read it. I think it came out today or yesterday, so you can just Google theatlantic.com, and it's going to be one of the main articles that comes out. And the title of it is, "It's Not Enough for Ukraine to Win. Russia has to lose." And I totally agree with that line. So I pulled off some snippets of that article, not the entire article by itself, but some important points that I wanted to read out to you in this article. So, a Russia that prevails would be a Russia even further empowered to meddle in Europe and to expand its influence with unlimited violence. A Russia that will have learned that it can commit slaughter and atrocities with impunity. A Russia whose ambitions will grow with success. Russian victory would, as well, teach the world that the West, including the United States, lacks the resolve, despite its wealth, to follow through on its commitments, offering Beijing an encouraging lesson. Obviously, Taiwan. Russia's theories of victory in Ukraine have collapsed one by one. Putin began by believing that the country would fall in a week, then that it would succumb to a month or two of hard fighting, then that Europe would abandon it during cold winter without Russian gas, then that Ukraine could be bludgeoned into submission by attacking its cities. The final theory of victory, that the West does not have the heart to pour vast resources into Ukraine indefinitely, needs to be disproved as well, because there is nothing beyond that. And I think so far in the last few months, we've had a very positive sign from Europe and NATO allies and the United States that have become very collaborative and have seemed to really be on the same page in terms of offering unconditional support to Ukraine in terms of weapons and ammunition and air defense systems. I think that now we're seeing a full commitment by Europe, because that is all thanks to the Ukraine army, the diplomats and Zelensky that have made it, made it happen, right? Without Ukrainian victories and gains in Kiev, in Kharkiv, and Kherson, even now in Bakhmut, it wouldn't give the confidence for Europe and other NATO allies to give Ukraine more weapons. And so also that is tied with a great Ukraine diplomacy. You have Zelensky flying, even to, yesterday he went to the KSA, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now he's in Hiroshima, if I'm not mistaken, in Japan during the G7. He was in France and England last week. So he's flying everywhere, trying to get as much support as possible and making Ukraine war relevant, right? So I think that's really important. All those two things tied together really allow Ukraine to has allowed Ukraine to unify the West as well, really unify them along one main important topic, which is the war with Russia. Because Russia's not only been waging this war against Ukraine, it's been waging this war against the West that it hates, right? Because it's so much better than Russia. Anyways, the last paragraph here that I've copied, but our expectations today should be measured. Unfortunately, a defeated Russia will still be malevolent, angry, and vengeful. It will probably still be ruled by the vertical of power, the hard men from the security ministries. It will be suffused with lawlessness and murder, and it will engage in subversion, political warfare, and malicious behavior of all kinds, essentially 90s Russia, if not worse. But who would not prefer to deal with 1,000 troll farms and front organizations than one Mariupol, right? Or one Bakhmut, or one Avdiivka, Marinka. Russia's made it very clear, at least in its state-run channels, that it wants to take Poland, it wants to take the Baltics, and it doesn't care if it has to destroy the entire country. They'll go ahead with that, and they're going to be completely fine. And this Russia would be far less dangerous to us, far less useful to China, of course, and far less likely to raise monstrous new threats in the years to come. So here it is, guys. I really recommend you guys to watch this video, read this article. Apologies, because it's so interesting and it has so many other great points in it. But I also think my last little opinion about it is that also for Russia to lose, it would also mean to bring massive reforms within the society. I personally was very hopeful in the beginning of this conflict that the Russians would not allow this conflict to continue for, months, right? I thought it would be over because the Russians would allow it. After all, they were saying they were our brothers and cousins, right? They were pretending that they were, family to us, and then they did nothing. And you can tell me, oh, I know this Russian guy on this YouTube channel or this Russian person that's against this war. And I also know a lot of them, but they're not enough. And we need to look at the general population in Russia and what they're actually doing. And what they're actually doing is nothing. They're oppressed, they're scared. And all they've been doing the last few months is just fleeing the country or finding ways to avoid fighting. Right? They've been avoiding totally the major, elephant in the room, and that is they need to get rid of this regime, this kleptocracy. The Russism, this ideology of Russism is real. And nobody talks about it. Nobody's doing anything about it in Russia. Very minimal protests, if none at all. And so, in my opinion, the Russians have lost the ability to change things. And those reforms will need to be imposed by the West somehow, in my opinion. A way to reform the society, its education, also the way that they look at history, right? They seem to always victimize themselves, the Russian society, that it's not us, it's them. They're hurting us. They're trying to take away, our way of living. Nobody's doing anything to them. NATO bases are sprawling everywhere throughout Russian borders. It's the complete opposite. It's because of their behavior that other countries want to have desperately NATO security guarantees, right? Thus why Finland has been admitted to NATO, and the Baltics as well, which are some of the smallest countries that are at risk of being invaded by Russia. So they're completely delusional and brainwashed, and that to untangle, to expect, a thief to, to behave properly and auto regulate himself, it's not going to happen, right? It needs to be us who regulate them, as long as it takes for Russia to be reintegrated into the world, because otherwise we're going to have a massive problem. And that is only encouraging, as it said in the article, Beijing as well, right? If Russia prevails, it's only going to encourage other authoritarian regimes and communist regimes like North Korea, China, or Iran to continue their behavior of destabilizing order and peace. Last video, and it's kind of a positive but slash humorous post because, Russians in this video are being asked about their greatest achievements in the last 20 years. I don't think the answer is going to surprise you, but, kind of bridging this with the previous slide, I think that reforming Russian society is going to only do good to them, right? These people, as you can guess, don't know what Russia's been great at achieving in the last 20 years. They can't think of a single thing. And that will give them opportunity to have a government that is democratic. Eventually, it will take decades, if not even more time, generations of change. But once it gets to that point, Russia has so much opportunity to grow. It has so much potential. It's a vast country with a culture as well. And it's just the people are so pressed, the kleptocracy is just stealing everything from these people that they don't have, any room to breathe, right? So anyways, I thought this was interesting. I'm going to do the voiceover. So what achievements of modern Russia in the past 20 years can you remember? Question mark. Last 20 years? Question mark. Can't think of a thing. The last 20 years? So the guy's saying, well, maybe there is something new in industrial manufacturing, equipment building, maybe some sort of smartphone was made, or computer, maybe a new video camera or car. Unfortunately, there is nothing. No achievements. I think in Russia, there are no achievements. Only deterioration is happening. We just got off of our knees, right? This is the typical Soviet-minded grandpa in Russia. They got off their knees, right? That's a great achievement. I can also get off of my knees right now. Well, I got off my knees. That's an achievement. Everything is in ruins. We don't have any of it for now. Why is everything in ruins? What do you think? This is the time period we live in. And he says, none. Unfortunately, I can only hope for a great future for any nations in any countries, but if Russia continues down this path, they have no future. So something is going to have to give eventually. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think about this video. If you have any comments, any suggestions, please write it down in the comment section. Please subscribe to my channel if you enjoy my content, my opinions, slash analysis. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for supporting my channel and take care.